At sunrise, the tent was still zipped from the inside. His boots were still by the door. His pack was still leaning against the same pine where he had left it the night before. But the trail camera, the one he had clipped to a tree facing camp before bed, showed him walking out of the clearing at 2:14 in the morning, following something that never appeared on the footage. Welcome to Lunar Vault. Tonight, I have two true scary camping stories for you. The first one happened to me in Northern California, out past a reservoir where the campsites get sparse and the road starts feeling less like a road and more like a suggestion. I had been camping alone for years by then, and I was the kind of person who thought of myself as careful, not reckless. I never drank much when I camped alone. I always told someone where I was going. I kept a satellite communicator in my pack, a flashlight by my sleeping bag, and my truck keys in the same pocket of my pants every night. I liked the quiet of solo camping because it felt clean. No schedule, no noise, no walls. Just trees, dirt, water, and enough stillness to let your head settle. The trip was supposed to be 3 nights. I got there on a Thursday afternoon and drove farther down the forest road than most people usually bothered to go. There were one or two marked spots earlier. But I wanted distance, so I kept going until I found a small unofficial clearing about 30 feet off the road with a fire ring and enough level ground for my tent. It wasn't hidden exactly, but it wasn't obvious either. You had to know to look for it. The area was thick with pines and firs, and beyond the clearing, the land sloped down toward a creek I could hear but not quite see through the trees. The road itself was quiet. In the 3 hours between when I arrived and when the sun started dropping, only one vehicle passed. An older dark SUV that moved slowly enough to make me notice it. At the time, that meant nothing. I set up camp, ate early, and spent the evening doing absolutely nothing important. I watched the light go blue between the trees, listened to the creek, and sat by a small fire until the cold started pressing in enough that I finally crawled into the tent. The first odd thing happened sometime after midnight. I woke up because I heard footsteps on the gravel road. Not animal movement, not branches shifting. Footsteps, slow and steady, approaching from the direction of the main road. At first, I thought maybe another camper had parked nearby and was walking around in the dark for some reason, which was strange but not immediately terrifying. I stayed still and listened, expecting the sound to pass. It didn't. The footsteps stopped right outside my clearing. I could hear nothing else for maybe 10 seconds, and then I heard a single step on the dirt. Then another, softer now, because whoever it was had left the road and come into the camp. I held my breath and stared at the tent wall. No flashlight beam, no voice, no zipper sound. Just one more slow step, and then silence again. I had one of those moments where your body is already scared before your thoughts catch up. Every little sound got bigger all at once. The creek sounded farther away. The nylon of the tent suddenly felt thin. I reached slowly for the flashlight and clicked it on, aiming it at the tent wall near the door. Nothing. I listened another full minute and heard no more movement. Eventually, because I didn't want to sit there with my imagination doing all the work, I unzipped the tent, stepped out with the light, and checked the whole clearing. Nothing. No flashlight in the trees. No vehicle lights on the road. My cooler, pack, and chair were exactly where I left them. The fire was dead. The dirt looked untouched, though in fairness, the ground there was hard enough that it didn't always hold prints well anyway. I told myself I had heard a deer crossing the road, or maybe some weird echo from farther up the mountain. I got back in the tent and eventually fell asleep again. The next morning, I noticed my folding chair had been turned to face the tent. It had been facing the fire ring the night before. I know how weak that sounds. I know. A chair being in a slightly different direction is not exactly hard evidence of anything. If I had told that part to anyone by itself, I would sound ridiculous, even to me, so I tried to ignore it. I made coffee, walked down toward the creek, and spent the day fishing and wandering around the woods. I didn't see anyone, but I kept getting that sensation, the one where your attention keeps snagging on something you can't identify. A branch cracking somewhere too far to matter. A glimpse of dark color between trees that vanishes when you look straight at it. The sense that the forest around you is not empty, only quiet. By late afternoon, I was irritated with myself. I hate feeling jumpy. It makes me feel stupid and childish, like I'm manufacturing fear because there isn't enough going on. So I decided to take control of the feeling. I had a small trail camera in my truck that I sometimes use for wildlife. Nothing fancy, just motion activated. Before dark, I strapped it to a tree at the edge of camp, angled so it could see the fire ring, my tent, and most of the clearing. I remember actually feeling better after I did it. If someone was coming into camp at night, or if I was somehow sleepwalking around and moving my own chair without remembering, at least I'd know. That second night, I stayed up later than usual. No fire this time. Just my lantern on low and a book in my lap. Though I wasn't really reading, I was listening, waiting to hear if the road would give me those same footsteps again. Around 11:30, I heard the SUV. Same engine sound as the night before, slow and low, coming down the road. It passed my clearing without stopping. I heard it continue a little farther, then stop somewhere out of sight beyond the bend. No doors opened, no voices, no engine shutting off. It just idled for maybe a minute, then turned around and drove back the way it had come. That was the point where the whole thing stopped feeling like nerves. I zipped the tent completely, kept the flashlight in my hand, and fell asleep at some point despite trying not to. When I woke up, it was dawn. The first thing I noticed was that the tent door was half unzipped. From the outside, the zipper had been pulled down maybe a foot, just enough to create a dark wedge of opening near my boots. I froze immediately and looked around the tent. Nothing missing, nothing torn. My keys were still in my pants pocket. My pack was still where it had been. But the zipper was open and I knew I had shut it fully before bed because I checked it twice. I got out carefully and looked around. This time there were footprints. One set, boot prints. They came from the road, crossed through my clearing, stopped right outside the tent door, then circled round the back of the tent and returned to the road. I followed them only a few yards before stopping, because I could already see enough. They led to a place where a vehicle had pulled off the road briefly in the night. Two sets of tire tracks, fresh, pressed into the soft shoulder. My hands were shaking by then, though not from cold. I went straight to the trail camera. I remember feeling relief for about half a second, because finally I was going to get a normal answer. Maybe a drunk camper from down the road. Maybe somebody confused. Something explainable. I opened the footage. The first few clips were nothing. A flicker of branches, a moth. Then, around 2:14 in the morning, the camera caught movement. The picture showed me walking out of the clearing. That part hit me so hard I actually thought for a second I was still asleep. I was barefoot, wearing the same dark hoodie I had slept in. My posture looked wrong somehow, too stiff and too forward, like I was walking while still half under. I came out of the tent, stepped into the clearing, and then turned toward the trees on the far side, the opposite direction from the road. Then I walked out of frame. The next clip, 28 seconds later, showed me walking back into frame from the same direction, same stiff posture, same blank pace. I went straight back into the tent, and that was it. No second person, no sound, no visible reason for me to have left. But there was one detail that made it worse. At the far left edge of the frame, just before I stepped out of view, A patch of darkness between two trees shifted very slightly. Not enough to become a shape, not enough to prove anything. Just enough that your brain locks onto it and starts asking whether it was already there or whether something moved when I moved. I packed in under 10 minutes. Didn't eat, didn't clean up properly, didn't care. I drove straight to the ranger station on the way back out and showed the footage to the woman at the desk. She watched it twice and then asked me if anyone else had been with me. I said no. She asked if I had taken anything, drank heavily, or had any history of sleepwalking. No, no, and no. She got another ranger, an older guy with the kind of face that doesn't give you much. He watched the footage without saying much at all, then asked me exactly where the clearing was. When I told him, he went quiet for a few seconds before saying, "You're not the first person who's come in from that road early." That was all he would say at first. But after a little more talking, he admitted that over the past few years, there had been several reports from dispersed campers in that corridor. Footsteps at night. Campsite items moved, vehicles idling on the road and then leaving. One guy woke up to find someone had stacked stones around his fire pit while he slept. Another found muddy prints circling his tent and stopping by the door. The ranger told me they suspected someone had been using the road to mess with solo campers, maybe for years, not stealing, not attacking, just watching, approaching, and doing things that would keep people confused enough not to know how serious it was until they were already terrified. I asked whether they ever caught anyone. He said no. I asked about the SUV. He asked what color. When I told him dark, maybe blue or black, he nodded like that part didn't surprise him at all. I never camped off that road again. And what still gets me is that I don't know whether I actually sleepwalked out of the tent on my own or whether something outside woke me and drew me out in a state so foggy I never remembered it. Both possibilities bother me. Either my own body betrayed me in the worst possible place, or someone got close enough to me in the dark to make me leave the tent barefoot without ever fully waking. I don't know which answer is worse. The second story happened to a father and son in Colorado, and this one haunts me for a different reason. Because nothing supernatural happened, nothing even especially strange, if you look at each piece by itself. Just a trailhead, a conversation, and a stranger who was a little too interested. A friend of mine told me this story about his brother, and it stuck with me immediately because of how ordinary it sounded, right up until it didn't. His brother, Mark, had planned a 2-night backpacking trip with his son Eli after Eli finished his first year of college. Nothing extreme, just a high country loop they'd talked about doing together for a while. The kind of trip that was supposed to be about reconnecting, some hard hiking, a couple alpine lakes, time away from phones, all that. They got to the trailhead around 8 in the morning. There were only a few other vehicles there, a dusty Subaru, an older white pickup, and one dark green crossover parked crooked near the far end of the lot. Mark noticed it only because the windows were tinted so dark he couldn't see inside. Again, that meant nothing then. They started hiking and had one of those good first days people remember for years. Clear weather, nice trail, easy conversation that only really happens when you are walking side by side and don't have to look at each other much. Around late morning on the second day, they crossed paths with another hiker coming down from the ridge. He was alone, mid-30s maybe, clean cut, not scruffy, not disheveled, not obviously unstable, just friendly in that trailway where strangers swap quick information and keep moving. He asked how far they were headed. Mark told him the basin by the lake. The man asked whether they had come up from the main lot or the smaller east lot. Mark told him the main one. Then the guy laughed and said he was glad because his own car was in the main lot too, and he'd been nervous all morning somebody might break into vehicles there. That little detail stuck with Mark only later. At the time, it just made the conversation feel normal. The guy chatted another minute or so, asked whether they were out one night or two, said the weather was supposed to hold, then wished them luck, and kept walking downhill. They didn't think about him again until that evening. They made camp by a lake just below tree line. After dinner, Eli was taking pictures while Mark sat on a rock glassing the basin with binoculars for goats. Eventually, he looked back down the trail they had come up. Far below, just at the edge of where the trail dipped into a stand of firs, he saw movement. A person. Coming up, he adjusted the focus. Same build, same clothes, same compact pack. The man they had met earlier, except he was no longer going down to the trailhead. He was coming back toward them. Mark said nothing to Eli at first. He just watched. The man moved uphill steadily, then disappeared into the trees. An hour later, no one had come into camp. Maybe he had taken a turn off. Maybe Mark was mistaken. Maybe a dozen things. Still, something about it sat wrong in his stomach all through dinner. They turned in early. Sometime after midnight, Mark woke up to hear a soft, metallic clink outside the tent, like someone touching gear carefully and then stopping. He listened. Nothing. Then, maybe a minute later, came the sound again. Very light. Metal against metal. He slid his hand toward the pistol he kept in his chest bag at night, then unzipped the tent just enough to look. No one there. Moonlight, rocks, the dark outline of the trees, and their packs against a fallen log where they had left them. He stayed awake another hour and heard nothing else. By morning, he was almost ready to tell himself he had imagined it. Then Eli found the note. It was tucked under a flat rock beside the stove. Not crumpled, not random, placed there. The writing was neat, printed carefully in black ink, blue tent, grey pack, red pack, father son, Toyota Tacoma, Colorado plates. Staying 2 nights. That was the whole note. No greeting, no threat, just facts. Every single one correct. Mark said when he read it, he felt that very specific kind of fear that comes when something private has already become visible to somebody else long before you knew you were being observed. Not panic exactly. Not yet. Just the awful recognition that a line had already been crossed and you had missed the moment it happened. They packed immediately. No breakfast, no coffee, no debate. On the hike down, Mark kept looking back, and twice he thought he saw movement of the trail, shadowing them through the trees, never close enough to identify. Just close enough to make the back of his neck tighten. They made it to the parking lot around noon. Nothing looked wrong. Then Eli noticed a small black zip tie looped around the passenger side mirror of the truck, tightened down and trimmed clean. Mark checked the driver's side mirror. Another one. Then he looked at the dusty Subaru parked 2 spaces over. Same thing. A black zip tie around the mirror. At that point, the whole encounter on the trail snapped into focus differently. The questions about which lot, how many nights, whether they came in from the main trailhead, those had not been casual. The note was not random creep behavior. The zip ties were not random either. Someone had been selecting vehicles, marking them, and then matching them to hikers once they were deep enough in to be vulnerable. They drove straight to the ranger station and handed over the note. The ranger there asked to see the ties before they had even finished the story. That part scared Mark most afterward, because it meant the ranger already knew something about this pattern. Apparently, there had been several complaints that season from hikers in the same general area. Not assaults, not thefts, just encounters that all felt one step short of something worse. A stranger asking too many specific questions on the trail. Camps approached at night, notes listing gear and vehicle details, marked cars at trailheads. The rangers said they believed the same person was doing all of it. They had never caught him, They did not know exactly what he wanted, but they were sure of one thing. He chose people before they ever stepped onto the trail. That is the part that really got to Eli. Not the note, not the idea of being washed from the trees overnight. It was the fact that they had been selected in the parking lot before they even locked the truck and started walking. Marked, sorted, followed. And all it took after that was 5 minutes of polite trail conversation for them to confirm the rest themselves. They still backpack, from what I heard, but never the same way as before. Mark does not chat at trail junctions anymore, and Eli checks the mirrors every time he parks, even in grocery store lots. So, those were two true scary camping stories. One about a campsite that stopped feeling empty, and one about a stranger who may have decided everything before the trip had even really begun. I think what makes camping stories stay with people is how little there is between you and whatever is out there. A tent wall, a zipper, a dark tree line, a few careless answers to someone who seems friendly. That is all it takes sometimes for the wilderness to stop feeling open and start feeling watched. So, if you are ever out there alone and something feels wrong, listen to it. Because sometimes the most dangerous thing in the woods is not the thing you hear clearly, it's the thing that already knows where you are.